The security guard's voice was like gravel. "Ma'am, you can't be here. This is a private event." Rain slicked his uniform, mirroring the tears on her face. Her hand instinctively cradled the swell of her belly, the only warmth against the biting November wind. She looked past him, through the wrought iron gates, at the mansion blazing with light, a palace she once called home. Just 6 months ago, she was planning a nursery in that house. Tonight, her husband, Leo Beaumont, was inside celebrating his engagement to another woman. They had taken her dignity, her future, and her heart. But they made one mistake. They didn't take everything. They left her with a secret, and tonight, she was coming to collect. Ophelia Gray believed in love the way a sunflower believes in the sun. It was an unconditional, life-giving force, and for 2 years, Leo Beaumont had been her son. He wasn't just the heir to the Beaumont technology fortune. He was the man who saw her, an art history student with paint perpetually under her fingernails, and saw his whole world. He loved her quiet intensity, her passion for things that couldn't be bought, and the way she could find beauty in a rusted bridge or a peeling billboard. Their life was a whirlwind of genuine affection, a bubble of bliss against the backdrop of his family's staggering wealth. The Beaumont name was synonymous with innovation in power in Seattle, their empire built on groundbreaking micro-robotics. But Ophelia loved Leo, the man, not the name. She loved the way he'd sneak away from board meetings to meet her at a hole-in-the-wall ramen shop, his expensive suit hilariously out of place. The first crack in their fairy tale wasn't a crack at all. It was a wall of ice named Genevieve Beaumont. Leo's mother was a woman carved from glacial marble. Her approval was a currency more valuable than gold in Seattle's high society, and she had deemed Ophelia bankrupt from the moment they met. At their first disastrous dinner, Genevieve had surveyed Ophelia's simple black dress with a dismissive gaze. "Gray," she had mused, tasting the name like sour wine. "An Eastern European name. Humble origins, I presume?" Ophelia, daughter of a humble but proud watchmaker, had simply smiled. "We value hard work, Mrs. Beaumont." "How quaint," Genevieve had replied, turning back to her son. The dismissal was total. Leo had always sworn it didn't matter. "She'll come around, Ophelia. Once she sees how happy we are, once there's a grandchild." His voice had been full of hopeful conviction. And then, the grandchild became a reality. The 2 pink lines on the test felt like a promise, a confirmation of their love. When Ophelia told Leo he'd lifted her off the ground, his eyes shining with a joy so pure it brought tears to hers. "This changes everything," he'd whispered, kissing her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "This is our family, our real family." He was wrong. It changed everything, but not in the way they imagined. The call came 2 weeks later. Leo was supposed to be at a week-long tech symposium in Tokyo. Ophelia was at home, sketching ideas for the nursery, when Genevieve requested her presence at the mansion. The request was phrased like a royal summons. The Beaumont estate in Medina was less a house and more a monument to wealth. It loomed over Lake Washington, a fortress of glass and steel. Ophelia felt small the moment she stepped into the cavernous marble foyer. Genevieve was waiting in the formal sitting room, a place so devoid of personal touches it felt like a museum exhibit on the lives of the rich. She didn't offer tea. "I'll be direct," Genevieve began, her voice as cold as the room. "This situation with the pregnancy, it's a complication we must manage." Ophelia's hand went to her still flat stomach. "Manage? Genevieve, it's your grandchild." Genevieve let out a short, sharp laugh, devoid of humor. "It is a biological fact. It is not, however, a Beaumont. A Beaumont is about lineage, legacy, and strategic alliances, not unfortunate accidents." The cruelty of the words stole Ophelia's breath. "It wasn't an accident. We love each other. We're married." "A marriage I never sanctioned," Genevieve corrected her, "and a marriage that will be dissolved. Leo has come to his senses. He understands his duty to this family." She slid a thick envelope across the polished mahogany table. "This is a generous settlement. It will ensure you and the child are comfortable. You will sign a non-disclosure agreement, relocate, and you will never contact Leo or this family again." Ophelia stared at the envelope, then at the woman's unyielding face. Where is Leo? I need to hear this from him. Leo is unavailable. He has made his decision. A cold dread, heavier than any anchor, began to pull Ophelia down. She refused the envelope, stood up, and walked out of the mansion on trembling legs. She called Leo. No answer. She called again and again, straight to voicemail. Panic set in. She sent him a flurry of frantic texts. Your mother is trying to end our marriage. Call me. Leo, please. The only reply she got came 3 days later. It wasn't a call. It was an email from a law firm with her husband's name CC'd. The subject line read, Petition for Dissolution of Marriage. Attached were the documents, already signed by Leo. Her world didn't just crack, it atomized. The man who was her son had vanished, leaving behind a black hole. When she tried to return to their shared downtown apartment, the locks had been changed. A stoic doorman informed her that her belongings were in storage and handed her a box with a few personal items. The life she had built was gone, erased. For the next 6 months, Ophelia lived in a fog of grief and disbelief. The settlement money sat untouched in an account she refused to access. It felt like blood money. She moved into a tiny rundown apartment, surviving on her meager savings. The joy of her pregnancy was tainted with the bitterness of betrayal. Every kick from her growing baby was a painful reminder of the father who had abandoned them. Her only solace was her father, Mikhail Gray, whose quiet strength was a balm to her broken heart. He never once said, I told you so, only offering silent hugs and bowls of hot soup that tasted of home. Then one rainy November evening, while scrolling through a local news site, she saw it. A picture of Leo, smiling, with his arm around a blonde woman. The headline read, Beaumont heir to wed Davenport shipping heiress, Portia Davenport, engagement gala to be held this Saturday. The photo was a dagger to her heart. He was smiling. He looked happy, unburdened. While she was struggling to buy prenatal vitamins, he was planning a party. The woman, Portia, was the physical embodiment of everything Genevieve wanted. Old money, polished, perfect. Something inside Ophelia, something that had been dormant for months, finally snapped. It wasn't just grief anymore. It was a cold, hard rage. They thought they could erase her. They thought they could throw her away like a piece of trash and deny her child his birthright. She looked down at her swollen belly. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about this little life, this innocent baby who deserved to know its father, who deserved more than a secret, shameful existence. She would not be erased. She would go to that party. She would walk into that mansion, not as a beggar, but as Leo Beaumont's wife, his pregnant wife, and she would force them all to look at what they had done. The women's shelter was warm, but it smelled of disinfectant and quiet desperation. After her savings ran out, this was where Ophelia had landed. Humiliation was a constant, bitter taste in her mouth. She was a Beaumont, or had been, and now she was lining up for a serving of donated lasagna. The other women there had stories etched into the weary lines of their faces. Ophelia felt like an imposter, her tragedy born of love and luxury, so different from theirs, yet resulting in the same stark reality, alone, pregnant, and terrified. Her days blurred into a monotonous cycle of searching for work, an impossible task for a heavily pregnant woman with no recent references, and attending mandatory counseling sessions. It was there, in a sterile room with a box of tissues on the table, that a therapist asked a question that pierced through her fog of despair. Forget what they took from you, Ophelia. What do you still have? What is yours and yours alone? The question echoed in her mind. They had taken her husband, her home, her sense of security. But what was left? She had her baby, and she had her father. That weekend, she took a bus to the small, cluttered shop where Mikhail Gray performed his quiet magic. Gray and Son timepieces, the old sign read, a relic from a time when her grandfather was alive. The air inside smelled of metal, oil, and old wood. Tiny gears and springs lay in organized chaos on his workbench. Mikhail looked up, his magnified glasses perched on his forehead, his kind eyes crinkling with worry as he saw her. He didn't say a word, just enveloped her in a hug that smelled of home. He took in her worn coat and the exhausted slump of her shoulders, his heart breaking for his daughter. "They are having a party," Ophelia said, her voice flat as she sat on a stool. "He's engaged." Mikhail's hands, usually so steady, paused over the delicate intestines of a vintage watch. He had despised the Beaumonts from the start, not for their wealth, but for their arrogance. He saw the weakness in Leo and the cruelty in his mother. "You should not concern yourself with those people," he said gently in his thick, melodic accent. "You have your new life now. Our life. He's a part of this baby, Papa. They can't just throw us away and pretend we don't exist." Ophelia's voice cracked. "I'm going there. To the party. I need them to see me." Mikhail looked at her, seeing not a victim, but the stubborn fire of her mother, who had passed away years ago. He knew arguing was useless. If she had made up her mind, he could only support her. He sighed, a long, weary sound, and moved to a small safe hidden behind a faded portrait of his own father, Sergei. He returned with a small velvet-worn box. Inside was a locket. It was not a grand piece of jewelry. It was silver, tarnished with age, with an intricate design of a bird, a firebird from the old country's fables, etched onto its surface. "This was your grandfather's," Mikhail said, his voice thick with emotion. "Sergei, he made this himself. He was more than a watchmaker, Ophelia. He was an inventor, a genius. This was his most prized possession, along with his journals." Ophelia had heard stories of her grandfather, a brilliant man who had fled the Soviet Union with his family, his dreams packed into a single suitcase. He had died when she was just a baby, his genius supposedly lost to the struggle of a new life in a new country. "He always said it held his legacy," Mikhail continued, placing the cool metal into her palm. "I do not know what he meant. It does not open. But he told me to give it to my child one day, when they needed strength, to remind them of where they come from. You come from a line of creators, my girl, not takers. You have the heart of Sergei Grey. Do not forget that." Ophelia closed her fingers around the locket. It felt solid, heavy with a history she didn't fully understand. It was a tangible link to a past, to a strength she desperately needed to borrow. The intricate bird seemed to stare back at her, its wings poised for flight. For the next few days, the locket became her talisman. She wore it under her sweater, its weight a constant reminder. She spent hours examining it, tracing the firebird's design, searching for a hidden clasp or seam. It remained sealed. One night, frustrated, she was looking through the few things she'd salvaged from her old life: a box of art books, some sketches, and a small photo album. In the back was a picture of her grandfather Sergei, a man with intelligent, sad eyes holding her as a baby. Around his neck was the very same locket. Her resolve hardened. This locket wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was a symbol of her heritage, a legacy of brilliance and resilience that flowed in her veins and in the veins of the child she carried. The Beaumonts had their empire of steel and code, but she had this. She came from creators. She went to a second-hand store and found a simple, elegant dark blue dress that, with a few careful alterations, fit her pregnant form perfectly. It was modest but dignified. It was the armor she would wear into battle. She used the last of her money for a taxi, knowing she couldn't arrive at the Beaumont mansion on a city bus. As she got ready on the night of the party, she looked at her reflection. Her face was paler. Her eyes held a new, somber depth. But there was a fierce determination there that hadn't existed 6 months ago. She was no longer the naive art student, blinded by love. She was a mother, a protector. She was a Grey. She clasped the Firebird locket around her neck. Its cool metal against her skin was a promise. She wasn't going there for revenge. She was going for justice. She was going to reclaim not just her own story, but the story of the family they had tried to dismiss as humble. The weeks leading up to the engagement gala were a blur of quiet preparation and simmering resolve for Ophelia. The locket her father had given her remained a mystery, a silent weight against her chest. She found herself poring over her grandfather's history, the fragments of a life her father had shared with her. Sergei Grey, the émigré genius, who arrived in America with patents in his head but no capital in his pockets. He'd worked menial jobs, fixing watches and radios, his brilliance dimmed by the daily grind of survival. He died of a heart attack at 52, a man whose potential, everyone said, was never realized. A nagging question began to form in Ophelia's mind. Why was a man so brilliant, so full of ideas, unable to make his mark? Her father always spoke of betrayal, of a partnership that went sour, but the details were hazy, lost to the pain of a young boy losing his hero. Her investigation began not with lawyers, but with librarians. At the Seattle Public Library's Central Branch, she spent days digging through archived newspapers and business journals from the early 1980s, the period when Beaumont technology had its meteoric rise. The official story was legendary. Robert Beaumont, Leo's grandfather, a charismatic visionary, had single-handedly developed the B100 micro-actuator, a device that revolutionized data storage and laid the foundation for the family's empire. But as Ophelia dug deeper, she found anomalies. A small, forgotten article in a tech newsletter from 1982 mentioned Robert Beaumont's new startup and his brilliant but reclusive partner, a foreign engineer. The partner was never named in subsequent articles. It was as if he had been scrubbed from the record. Her heart pounded. Could it be? She shifted her search to patent archives. The patent for the B100 microactuator was filed in March 1983, solely under Robert Beaumont's name. But Ophelia found something else, a series of rejected provisional patent applications from a year earlier. They described a nearly identical device. The applicant's name was Sergey Gray. The world tilted on its axis. It wasn't just a bad partnership, it was theft. The entire Beaumont fortune, the mansion, the legacy, the power Genevieve wielded with such arrogance, it was all built on a lie that had cost her grandfather his dream and likely his life. The knowledge was a terrifying, empowering inferno inside her. Her personal grievance with Leo and Genevieve suddenly seemed small, a single chapter in a much larger story of injustice. This wasn't just about a broken heart and an abandoned baby anymore. It was about reclaiming a stolen legacy. The Firebird locket around her neck suddenly felt heavier. He always said it held his legacy. What if it wasn't just a metaphor? She remembered her father saying her grandfather was a master of miniaturization, a watchmaker, an inventor. She took the locket to a trusted jeweler her father recommended, a quiet old man named Mr. Chen. "Can you see if there's a way to open this?" she asked. "Without damaging it?" Mr. Chen examined the locket under his loupe for a long time, turning it over and over. "This is not common craftsmanship," he murmured. "The seam is almost invisible. It is sealed, but there is a mechanism. See this feather on the wing?" He pointed to a tiny, almost imperceptible detail on the Firebird. "It is a pressure point, and here, the eye of the bird. It is a rotating lock. It requires a sequence, a combination." A combination. Ophelia's mind raced. A date, a number. She thought back to the stories her father told. Her grandfather's birthday, the date he arrived in America. She tried them all, pressing and turning, but nothing happened. The locket remained sealed, its secret locked tight. Time was running out. The gala was in 2 days. The secret inside the locket felt critical, but she couldn't access it. She had the patent applications, but that was circumstantial evidence. A story of he said from 40 years ago. She needed something more. Still, she couldn't back down. Even without the locket's contents, she had the truth. It was a weapon, and she intended to wield it. Her plan solidified. She wouldn't storm in screaming. That's what they would expect. That's what they could dismiss as the hysterics of a jilted lover. No, she would be calm, collected. She would present herself not as a victim, but as a creditor, there to collect a debt that was long overdue. The invitation, of course, was non-existent. She was not a guest. She was a reckoning. She knew from her time with Leo that security at these events was tight but focused on external threats. They were prepared for gate crashers and paparazzi, not for the founder's pregnant, cast-aside daughter-in-law walking through the front door as if she belonged there. On the evening of the party, she put on the blue dress. It was a stark contrast to the glittering gowns she knew would fill the mansion. She braided her hair simply. Her only piece of jewelry was the Firebird locket, resting prominently against her collarbone. As the taxi pulled up to the long, tree-lined driveway, winding its way toward the blaze of light that was Beaumont Manor, Ophelia took a deep breath. Her hand rested on her belly, feeling the steady, rhythmic kick of her baby. She was not just Ophelia Gray, the abandoned wife. She was Ophelia Gray, granddaughter of Sergei, the stolen genius. And she was the mother of the next generation, a child who carried the blood of both the deceiver and the deceived. Tonight she would not be an inconvenience to be managed. She would be the truth that brought an empire to its knees. The Beaumont mansion wasn't just lit up. It was incandescent, a beacon of obscene wealth against the dark, brooding Pacific Northwest sky. Valets in crisp uniforms scurried to and fro, opening doors of vehicles that cost more than most people's homes. Music, a live string quartet playing something Vivaldi, spilled out onto the manicured lawns. Ophelia paid her taxi driver and walked towards the grand entrance. She kept her head held high, her pace steady, her hand resting on her stomach as if for balance. She walked past the main security checkpoint as part of a larger group of guests, their laughter and glittering jewels providing the perfect camouflage. No one looked twice at the pregnant woman in the simple blue dress. They likely assumed she was a +1, someone's unassuming cousin from out of town. And then she was inside. The foyer was a sea of champagne flutes, designer gowns, and forced smiles. The air was thick with expensive perfume, and the low hum of powerful people making powerful conversation. A colossal ice sculpture of two swans, their necks intertwined, dripped slowly in the center of the room. It was a monument to a love that was a lie. For a moment, Ophelia felt a wave of nausea, a dizzying sense of unreality. This was a world she had briefly inhabited, but never belonged to. These were the people who had judged her, whispered about her, and then forgotten her the moment she was gone. Then she saw them. Across the ballroom, standing near the grand staircase, was the happy couple. Leo, handsome and confident in a tailored tuxedo, laughed at something his fiancée said. Portia Davenport was stunning, a cool, statuesque blonde poured into a silver sequin dress. And standing beside them, holding court, was Genevieve Beaumont, radiating smug triumph in a gown the color of blood. Ophelia began to walk. Her movement was slow, deliberate. As she cut a path through the glittering crowd, a subtle shift occurred. The hum of conversation began to falter. A guest noticed her, his eyes widening slightly. He nudged his wife. She turned and a small gasp escaped her lips. A ripple of silence began to spread outwards from Ophelia's position, a wave of shock and curiosity that lapped at the edges of the room. By the time she was 20 feet away from the central group, the string quartet was the only sound in the vast hall. Every eye was on her. The ghost had returned to the feast. Leo saw her first. The smile froze on his face, his champagne flute tilting precariously in his hand. His face, which had looked so carefree moments before, drained of all color. He looked like he'd seen an apparition. Portia's smile tightened, her eyes narrowing with confusion and annoyance. "Who is that?" she murmured to Leo, her voice a sharp whisper. But it was Genevieve's reaction that was most profound. Her regal poise shattered. For a fraction of a second, raw, unfiltered fury flashed in her eyes, followed by a flicker of something else. Panic. She had thought this problem was disposed of, paid off, and sent away. Ophelia stopped about 10 feet from them, a silent island in a sea of stunned onlookers. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just stood there, her presence a question that hung in the air, more potent than any accusation. Her hand never left the swell of her belly. The simple, undeniable fact of her pregnancy was a bomb in the center of the room. "Ophelia," Leo finally breathed, his voice barely audible. "What are you doing here?" "I believe I'm still your wife, Leo," she said, her voice clear and steady, carrying through the cavernous room. "Or did you forget to finalize one piece of paperwork before celebrating your next conquest?" A collective gasp went through the crowd. The whispers started, frantic and delicious. "Wife? Did she say wife?" Genevieve stepped forward, her composure snapping back into place like a steel mask. "You have no right to be here. Security!" she hissed, her eyes scanning the room for the guards she employed. "Don't bother, Genevieve," Ophelia said, her gaze locking with the older woman's. I'm not here to cause a scene. I'm here for a conversation about family, about legacy. Portia finally found her voice. Leo, what is the meaning of this? Who is this woman? She demanded, her perfectly manicured hand gripping his arm. Leo couldn't look at either of them. His eyes were fixed on Ophelia's pregnant belly, a truth he had tried to outrun. Guilt and shame warred on his face. She's my ex, he stammered. Ex? Ophelia allowed a small, sad smile to touch her lips. That's a cold word for the mother of your child, isn't it? The room erupted in a cacophony of hushed chaos. The ice swans dripped. The string quartet stood frozen, bows hovering over strings. This was better than any soap opera. The Davenport shipping heiress, the Beaumont tech heir, and the abandoned pregnant wife. Genevieve's face was a thundercloud. Get her out of here, now! Two burly security guards in black suits finally began to move towards Ophelia, but Ophelia didn't flinch. She held Genevieve's gaze, her voice dropping slightly, but with an intensity that cut through the noise. Before you have me thrown out, you might want to ask me why I'm really here. It has to do with a man you once knew, a brilliant man, an inventor named Sergei Gray. At the mention of the name, the blood drained from Genevieve Beaumont's face. The mask of fury and indignation dissolved, replaced by a raw, primal fear. It was a fleeting expression, gone in an instant, but Ophelia saw it. And in that moment, she knew she had her. The queen had just seen the ghost of the man upon whose stolen bones her castle was built. The guards paused, sensing the sudden shift in power. The game had just changed. The name hung in the air between them, a name no one in that room should have known, a name that belonged to a forgotten past. Sergei Gray. For the glittering guests, it was meaningless. For Genevieve Beaumont, it was a specter, a skeleton key to the deepest, darkest vault of her family's history. Her recovery was instantaneous and masterful. She waved a dismissive hand at the hovering guards. It's all right. This is clearly a disturbed young woman making baseless accusations to extort money. I will handle this. Her voice was laced with manufactured pity, an attempt to reframe the narrative for her audience. She turned back to Ophelia, her eyes burning with a cold fire. I don't know who you're talking about, but this sad performance is over. Are you sure? Ophelia asked softly, taking a deliberate step forward. The guards tensed, but she ignored them. Because I have a feeling you know exactly who he is. He was a watchmaker, an inventor. He had a partner once. A partner who stole everything from him and left him to die with nothing. Leo looked from Ophelia to his mother, a sliver of confusion piercing his guilt. Mother, what is she talking about? Who is Sergei Gray? She's talking nonsense, darling, Genevieve said, but her hand went to her throat, a telltale sign of distress. She's unwell, grieving and lashing out. Portia, however, was not so easily placated. She was a Davenport, raised in a world of cutthroat business deals and strategic maneuvering. She sensed a weakness, a hidden liability. Her grip on Leo's arm tightened, her perfectly painted nails digging into his tuxedo jacket. Leo, I think you should answer the question, she said, her voice dangerously sweet. Ophelia pressed her advantage, her gaze never leaving Genevieve. Your husband, Robert Beaumont, founded this company on the B100 microactuator. The official story is that he invented it in his garage, a stroke of solitary genius. She let the words hang in the air. But the truth is, he had a partner, a brilliant immigrant engineer who designed the prototype, an engineer your husband promised the world to before filing the patent under his name alone and casting him aside. The whispers in the crowd grew louder, turning from gossip about a love triangle to something far more scandalous: corporate espionage, theft of intellectual property. The origin story of Beaumont Technology, a Seattle institution, was being challenged on the floor of its own ballroom. This is slander! Genevieve's voice was sharp, but a tremor of panic ran beneath it. You have no proof. You are a desperate, pathetic girl, trying to ruin us because my son left you. Proof? Ophelia's hand went to her neck and touched the Firebird locket. My grandfather was a meticulous man. He kept records, journals, blueprints. She was bluffing. She didn't know for sure what was in the locket, or if the journals even still existed. But it was a calculated risk. She was watching Genevieve, looking for a reaction. And she got one. At the mention of journals and blueprints, Genevieve's eyes darted unconsciously towards the grand, sweeping staircase, towards the second floor where the private study was. It was a micro-expression, lasting less than a second, but it was enough. There was something there, something incriminating that she was afraid of. Leo was now looking at his mother with dawning horror. He had been raised on the legend of his grandfather, the self-made titan. Ophelia's words, spoken with such quiet conviction, were planting seeds of doubt in the bedrock of his identity. "Mother," he said, his voice pleading, "tell me she's lying." Genevieve ignored him. Her entire focus was on Ophelia, a predator sizing up its prey. "So, this is your plan? Come here with some fanciful story, a conspiracy theory, and hope we'll pay you to go away? You underestimate me." "And you," Ophelia replied, her voice ringing with the clarity of truth, "have underestimated his granddaughter." The standoff was broken by an unexpected voice. "Well, this is certainly more entertaining than the silent auction," said a stern-looking man standing beside Portia. It was her father, Wallace Davenport, a man whose shipping empire was notoriously ruthless. He looked from Ophelia to Genevieve, his expression one of shrewd calculation. "Genevieve, perhaps you should address the young woman's claims. My family is about to be joined with yours. We have a right to know if the foundation of this house is solid or built on sand." The direct challenge from an equal, from a business ally, hit Genevieve harder than Ophelia's accusations. This was no longer a domestic squabble she could control. This was a potential business catastrophe. Her investors, her board members, her society rivals, they were all in this room, watching, listening, judging. The perfect engagement party had devolved into a corporate tribunal. The cracks were showing, not just in Genevieve's composure, but in the very foundation of the Beaumont Empire. And Ophelia stood in the center of it all, a pregnant, determined woman in a second-hand dress, holding a hammer she hadn't even fully swung yet. The air crackled with tension. The real truth was about to come out. The room was a pressure cooker. Wallace Davenport's challenge had shifted the dynamic entirely. Genevieve Beaumont was no longer a queen banishing a peasant. She was a CEO facing a public audit from a major stakeholder. "This is absurd," Genevieve finally said, her voice tight with forced control. "A private family matter is being twisted by a troubled individual. We will discuss this later." She tried to steer her son and future daughter-in-law away, an attempt to close ranks and present a united front. But Leo wouldn't move. He pulled his arm from her grasp, his face a mask of turmoil. "No, we'll discuss it now. Ophelia," he said, turning to her, his eyes begging for an answer that would absolve him, his family, of this terrible accusation. "What proof do you have? You can't just say these things." This was the moment. Ophelia knew the provisional patent applications were not enough. It had to be something definitive, something undeniable. Her bluff about the journals had shaken Genevieve, but it wasn't a knockout blow. Her hand instinctively closed around the locket, the combination, the sequence Mr. Chen had mentioned. What if it wasn't a date? What if it was something else? Her mind raced back to her research. The patent number, B100. It couldn't be that simple, could it? Her grandfather was a genius of miniaturization, of intricate clockwork, but he was also a man who had his life's work stolen. Maybe the key wasn't complex, but symbolic. Her fingers found the tiny raised feather on the Firebird's wing. Mr. Chen had said it was a pressure point. She pressed it. Then her other hand went to the bird's eye, a rotating lock. She began to turn it. One click. 0, 0. A faint, almost inaudible snick echoed from the locket. Time seemed to slow down. Under the glare of the ballroom chandeliers, Ophelia worked the two halves of the silver locket apart. It opened not like a book, but with a complex twisting motion, revealing not a space for a photo, but a marvel of microengineering. Inside, nestled in a velvet lining, was a tiny, tightly wound spool. It looked like a thread of dark, translucent film, microfilm. "My grandfather wasn't just an inventor," Ophelia said, her voice trembling slightly with the gravity of her discovery. "He was a survivor. He knew the kind of man he was dealing with. He didn't just keep paper records. He made a copy, the kind of copy no one would ever think to look for. She carefully unspooled a tiny section of the film. It's all here, Genevieve. The original dated schematics for the B-100, the partnership agreement signed by both him and your husband, and his personal log, detailing every meeting, every promise Robert made, and every lie he told. Genevieve stared at the locket, her face ashen. This was the proof. The ghost in the machine, a 40-year-old secret worn around her victim's granddaughter's neck. The one thing she and Robert had searched for after Sergei's death, the one loose end they could never find, was now revealed in the heart of her perfect party. Leo took a stumbling step forward, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Let me see." Ophelia held it out. Even from a distance, the intricate, hand-drawn diagrams were visible on the tiny film. Leo recognized the design instantly. He had studied it his entire life. But below the familiar drawings was a signature that was not Robert Beaumont's. It was a flourish of Cyrillic script. Sergei Petrov. The sound Leo made was a strangled gasp of horror. The legend he was raised on, the noble legacy he was meant to inherit, was a lie. He was the heir to a thief. The crowd surged forward, murmuring, trying to get a look at the tiny object that was dismantling an empire. Phones were discreetly raised, their cameras recording the downfall. Wallace Davenport stepped forward, his face grim. He looked at the locket, then at the shattered expression on Leo's face, and finally at the petrified mask of Genevieve. He turned to his daughter, Portia. "We are leaving," he said, his voice cold and final. "The engagement is off. The Davenport family will not be associated with fraud." Portia didn't protest. Her face, a moment ago smug and triumphant, was now a mixture of fury and humiliation. She ripped the enormous diamond ring from her finger and threw it onto the floor at Leo's feet. It skittered across the marble with a sound that was deafening in the charged silence. "Don't ever speak to me again," she spat, before turning on her heel and marching out of the ballroom, her father striding behind her. The guests began to melt away, not wanting to be caught in the blast radius of the implosion. They fled with the most valuable currency in their world, a devastating piece of gossip. Within minutes, the grand ballroom was nearly empty. It was just Ophelia, Leo, and Genevieve, standing amidst the ruins of their lives. The ice swans had begun to visibly melt, their elegant forms slumping into a distorted mess. Leo finally looked at his mother, his voice broken. "All this time, our whole life, it was a lie?" Genevieve didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on Ophelia, and on the locket that was her undoing. The arrogance, the power, the icy control. It all crumbled away, leaving behind a desperate, terrified old woman. She saw her future. Legal battles, public disgrace, financial ruin. The Beaumont name, the only thing she had ever truly worshipped, would be dragged through the mud and destroyed. She looked at Ophelia, at the undeniable swell of her belly. That child carried the blood of Sergei Grey, the blood of the true genius. It was the only legitimate claim to the legacy that was left. It was her only hope. And in a move that shocked everyone, most of all herself, Genevieve Beaumont, the iron-willed matriarch of Seattle society, took a faltering step forward. Her designer heels were unsteady on the marble floor. Her spine, always so rigid, began to bend. And then she fell to her knees. The sharp, brittle sound of Genevieve Beaumont's knees striking the marble floor was a sonic crack in the foundation of the world Ophelia had known. It was not the thunderous collapse she might have imagined, but a quiet, pathetic report, like a bone snapping under immense pressure. The sound echoed in the cavernous, near-empty ballroom, a space that only an hour ago had been filled with the triumphant hum of the city's elite. Now it was a tomb of opulence, haunted by the ghost of a stolen legacy. Leo stood frozen, a statue of horrified disbelief. This woman, his mother, was the architect of his life. A figure of such unyielding strength, she seemed less a person and more a force of nature. He had seen her stare down corporate raiders, eviscerate political opponents with a single cutting remark, and command legions of society with an imperious flick of her wrist. To see her kneeling, brought low by a pregnant art student in a second-hand dress, was like watching a mountain crumble into dust. The entire landscape of his reality had just been leveled. Ophelia looked down at the kneeling woman, and the surge of adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation receded, leaving behind a vast, hollow emptiness. There was no victory in this, no sweet taste of revenge. She saw not a vanquished enemy, but a desperate, pathetic woman stripped bare of her power, her entire identity predicated on a lie that had finally been called due. The sight was simply sad, profoundly and wearily sad. Genevieve's head was bowed, her perfectly coiffed hair, a helmet of auburn defiance, now looked like a fragile, cracking shell. When she finally raised her eyes, the glacial blue irises Ophelia knew so well were flooded with tears, carving messy tracks through her expensive foundation. The mask was not just gone, it had been pulverized. "Please," Genevieve whispered, the word ragged and raw, clawing its way out of her throat. It was a sound Leo had never heard his mother make. "Don't do this. Don't destroy everything. Robert's name, the company, it's all my son has." Ophelia felt a deep ancestral ache in her bones, a sorrow that belonged not just to her, but to her father, and to the grandfather she never knew. "Destroy it?" she asked, her voice quiet but resonant, carrying the weight of 3 generations. "It was already destroyed, Genevieve. It was born from destruction. You talk about Robert's name, but you buried my grandfather's. His life, his dreams, his entire future, all of it was destroyed so that you could build this palace on his bones. My father grew up in the shadow of that unexplained loss, feeling the ghost of his own father's broken heart. You didn't just steal a patent, you stole a man's spirit, and you left his family to wonder why." The full confession finally came tumbling out of Genevieve, a torrent of long-suppressed truths. "I know," she sobbed, the words choked with a lifetime of guilt. "I know. When I met Robert, we had nothing. He had this charisma, this immense ambition, but he was always missing a piece. Then he met Sergei. Your grandfather was incandescent, a true genius. But he was an artist, not a businessman. He trusted Robert completely. Robert saw the B-100 and he saw the world. He told me it was the only way, that a man like Sergei would never have the ruthlessness to make it a success. I was young, I was scared of being poor, and I wanted the life Robert promised me. So I went along with it. I helped him. I helped him erase Sergei. I told myself it was for our future, for our family." Leo finally stumbled forward, the sound of his leather shoes unnaturally loud on the marble. He looked at his mother, but he was seeing a stranger. "And you let me worship him," he said, his voice a broken whisper of accusation. "My whole life, I've tried to live up to the legend of Grandfather Robert, the solitary visionary. You built my entire identity on his legacy." "What was I supposed to do?" Genevieve cried, turning her desperate, tear-streaked face to her son. "Untell the lie? Confess to the world that your grandfather was a thief and I was his accomplice? That everything we have, every door that ever opened for you, was because of a crime? I did it to protect you, to protect the family name." "No," Ophelia said, her voice cutting through Genevieve's frantic justifications with the clean, cold edge of a scalpel. "You did it to protect yourself, and your position, and your wealth. And when I became a threat to that, you were willing to do it all over again. You tried to erase me. You tried to erase your own grandchild, another life deemed an inconvenience to the great Beaumont name." At the mention of the grandchild, Genevieve's focus sharpened through her tears. A flicker of the old calculation returned to her eyes. She looked at Ophelia's belly, at the undeniable swell that represented the future, and saw her last desperate gambit. "The child," she breathed, the word a prayer. He is a Beaumont. Yes, but he is also a Grey. The blood of the genius, the rightful heir to the true legacy, the only rightful heir." Her mind, honed by decades of strategic maneuvering, saw the path. She could salvage this. She could rebrand the narrative. "Ophelia, please. We can fix this. For the sake of the child. Let's make a deal. We can issue a statement, acknowledge your grandfather's foundational contributions. We'll create a multi-million-dollar foundation in his name. Anything you want. This house is yours, Stocks, a seat on the board, a controlling interest in the company? Just, please, don't release that film. Don't let the name be ruined in public. Ophelia listened to the frantic bargaining and felt a sense of profound clarity. She looked at Genevieve's pleading face, then at Leo's shattered one. He was weak, a hollow man shaped by his mother's corrosive ambition, but a sliver of the man she once loved was still visible in his horrified eyes. And more importantly, he was the father of her child. Annihilating them completely, leaving them with nothing but public shame and scandal, would serve no one. It would only mean her son would be born into a scorched earth legacy of hate. She would not be like them. Vengeance was their currency, not hers. "Get up, Genevieve," Ophelia said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it held an absolute, unbreakable authority that made it a command, not a request. Stunned by the unexpected order, Genevieve hesitated for a moment, then shakily, awkwardly, pushed herself back to her feet. She stood before Ophelia, no longer a queen before a peasant, but a supplicant awaiting sentencing. "This was never about money," Ophelia stated, closing the Firebird locket with a decisive final click. The secret was safe again, but now it was a weapon she held in reserve. "So I will not be accepting your bribes. This is what is going to happen. You are going to listen, and you are going to agree. Tomorrow morning, my lawyers will contact yours. The ownership of Beaumont Technology is going to be fundamentally restructured. 51% of the company's shares will be placed into an irrevocable trust in the name of my son, your grandson. I will be the sole trustee, managing his interest until he is of legal age. Your grandfather, Sergey Gray, will be posthumously and publicly named as the official co-founder of the company. His story, the true story, will be told and integrated into the corporate history. It will be on the website, in the company headquarters, and in a press release you will both sign." She let that sink in before turning her gaze to Leo. "You and your mother will retain a minority share. You will have enough to live comfortably, but your control, your influence, your dynasty, it's over. You, Leo, will have a choice. You can be a father to your son, but you will not buy his affection with Beaumont money. You will earn his love and his respect with your time, your presence, and your honesty. You will start by telling him the truth about his family when he is old enough to understand." Finally, her cool, steady gaze returned to the woman who had caused her so much pain. "And you, Genevieve," she said, her voice dropping, each word delivered with precision. "You will have no say in his upbringing. You will not influence his education, his values, or his life. You will be his grandmother by title, and that is all. And when you are in his presence, you will treat him, and me, with the dignity and respect you have never shown anyone you deem beneath you. These are not requests. These are not negotiating points. These are my terms. The price for my silence." It was an absolute checkmate. She hadn't destroyed the company. She had reclaimed it for its rightful heir. She wasn't erasing the Beaumonts. She was correcting the historical record and demoting them to their proper place within it. She was leaving them their name, but stripping it of its stolen power. Leo, his face pale and etched with a shame so profound it was almost a physical wound, slowly, almost imperceptibly, nodded his head. It was the end of his world, but in Ophelia's terms, he heard the faint, terrifying echo of a chance for a new one, an honest one. Genevieve stood rigid, the tears on her face having dried. She looked at Ophelia, at the fierce, unyielding strength in her eyes, and she saw the ghost of Sergey Gray. She saw the genius, the resilience, and the fire she and her husband had tried and failed to extinguish. All she could do was nod, a single spastic jerk of her head. It was the silent signature on the treaty of her unconditional surrender. Without another word, Ophelia turned. Her mission was complete. Her shoulders were straight, her head held high as she walked away. She walked across the vast, lonely expanse of the marble floor, past the discarded diamond ring that glittered like a fallen star, past the grotesquely melting ice swans, a perfect metaphor for the love they were meant to represent. She pushed open the grand doors and stepped out into the cool, clean wash of the November night. The air felt fresh, pure, and filled with promise. She took a deep breath, and as she did, she felt a strong, reassuring kick from within. It was her son, a silent affirmation. She placed a hand on her belly, the Firebird locket warm against her skin. She had walked into that mansion an abandoned, pregnant wife, a problem to be managed. She was walking out as the guardian of a reclaimed legacy, the mother of the future, and the master of her own fate. The truth had not just set her free, it had given her an empire. And so Ophelia Gray's story isn't just about a woman scorned. It's a powerful reminder that the truth has a way of rising to the surface, no matter how deeply it's buried. It shows us that true strength isn't found in wealth or a famous last name, but in courage, integrity, and the fierce, unyielding love of a mother for her child. Ophelia walked into that mansion with nothing but the truth and walked out with everything that mattered. Justice for her family, a future for her son, and her own dignity reclaimed. She didn't just expose a lie, she rebuilt a legacy on a foundation of truth. What do you think was the most powerful moment in Ophelia's journey? Let us know in the comments below. If this story of resilience and ultimate justice moved you, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that will inspire and captivate you. Click that notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for listening.